Take a slow breath. You're safe here. This is a story from Moonlight Japanese Sleep Stories. The calm shore where waves whisper. Prologue: the shore that remembers. The shore lay quiet in the early hours before dawn, when the sky above Japan's eastern coast still held the last traces of night. It was neither fully dark nor fully light, but suspended in a gentle in-between, as if time itself had slowed to breathe. The sea moved with an unhurried rhythm. Waves reached the sand not with force, but with patience, folding and unfolding like long, measured sighs. Each wave seemed to whisper something as it withdrew, words not meant to be understood, only felt. This shore had existed long before names were given to it. Long before maps traced its outline, before villages formed along the hills, before footsteps learned its texture. The rocks remembered salt and wind. The pine trees behind the beach remembered storms, and before that, silence. And somewhere between the water and the land, memory lingered. It was said quietly, without insistence, that those who stayed near this shore long enough would begin to feel as if the sea were speaking directly to them. Not in voices, not in thoughts, but in a subtle easing of the heart, as if something heavy had finally been set down. The shore did not choose who came. It did not call out or demand attention. It simply existed, waiting, letting the waves speak in their own time. On this particular morning, as the horizon began to pale and the air carried the faint scent of wet sand and pine resin, the shore welcomed another presence. Not with ceremony, not with sound, but with the same steady rhythm it had offered for centuries. The waves whispered, and the story began to unfold. Chapter 1: A town between sea and hills. The town rested quietly between the hills and the sea, as if it had settled there by accident and decided, over time, to stay. From above, it looked modest rows of low houses, with dark tiled roofs, narrow roads winding gently rather than straight, and small fields that followed the natural curves of the land. There were no tall buildings, no sharp edges. Everything seemed shaped by years of compromise with wind, rain, and salt. In the early morning, mist drifted down from the hills and slipped between the houses. It softened their outlines, blurred the boundary between one roof and the next, until the town appeared less like a collection of structures and more like a single, breathing organism. At the edge of the town, closest to the shore, stood an old road. It was paved but uneven, its surface cracked in places where grass had pushed through. This road had once carried carts and bicycles, footsteps and voices, but now it was used mostly by those who preferred solitude or habit over speed. The sea was never far. Even when it could not be seen, it could be heard, its steady presence woven into daily life like a second heartbeat. Windows were built to face it. Laundry dried in its breeze. Conversations paused unconsciously when the waves grew louder. Among the town's residents, there was a quiet understanding the sea was not something to be conquered or escaped. It was simply there, a constant companion that asked nothing and offered much. He arrived without announcement. There was no crowd to witness his arrival, no sign to mark the moment. He stepped off the small local train at the unmanned station, carrying a single worn bag. The platform was empty, save for a bench and a timetable faded by years of sun. He stood for a moment after the train departed, listening as its sound diminished and was replaced once more by wind and distant surf. His name was not spoken aloud. Names mattered less here, he sensed, than presence. Than the way one moved through space, or paused to listen. He adjusted the strap of his bag and walked down the narrow path leading away from the station, toward the town. As he walked, he noticed small details: a stone shrine half hidden by moss near the tracks. A cluster of hydrangeas is heavy with dew. The way the road curved never revealed too much at once. The town did not seem surprised by him. Houses watched quietly from behind sliding windows. A cat slept curled atop a low wall, unmoved by his passing. Somewhere, a radio murmured, its voice indistinct. He reached the edge of the town just as the mist began to lift. From there, the shore opened before him. The beach stretched wide and pale, framed by dark rocks and a line of wind-shaped pines. The sea reflected the growing light, its surface textured with gentle ripples rather than waves. He stopped walking. Something in the air felt different here, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but distinctly present. As if the space itself had depth, layers unseen beneath the surface. He set his bag down in the sand and removed his shoes, pressing his bare feet into the cool grains. The sensation grounded him, drawing his attention fully into the moment. For a long while, he simply stood. The waves approached, retreated, approached again. Each movement followed the last with quiet consistency, asking nothing of him. A memory surfaced, not sharply, but like an image seen through water. He had been here before. Not recently. Not in any way that could be measured easily. But the recognition was there, subtle and undeniable, like the feeling of returning to a place from a dream. Behind him, the town continued its slow awakening. Ahead of him, the sea waited. At last, he picked up his bag and walked along the shore, following the curve of the land. His footprints appeared briefly behind him before being softened and erased by the tide. Farther down the beach stood an old wooden house, weathered to the color of driftwood. It faced the sea without fear, its windows wide, its presence calm and unassuming. This would be where he stayed. As he approached, a figure emerged briefly at the doorway, an older woman, her movements unhurried, her posture relaxed. She did not look surprised when she saw him. Instead, she smiled faintly, as if confirming something she already knew. "You've come at last," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied, his voice low. "I have." She stepped aside without another question, holding the door open. "Welcome," she said simply. The sea continued to whisper behind them, and the morning light spread slowly across the shore, illuminating a place where past and present, land and water, memory and stillness coexisted without conflict. And in that quiet balance, the town accepted him not as a stranger, but as someone who had finally arrived. Chapter 2: The House That Faces the Sea. The house stood closer to the water than any other building along the shore, as if it had taken one careful step forward and decided not to retreat. Its wooden exterior had been bleached by years of sun and salt, softened by wind and rain until its edges no longer felt sharp. The grain of the wood showed clearly, each line a quiet record of passing seasons. When the sea breeze moved, the house responded with faint sounds: wood settling, shutters breathing, the gentle creak of a structure that had learned to listen. Inside, the air was cool and carried the subtle scent of tatami, old paper, and something faintly mineral. As though the sea had found its way indoors long ago and never fully left. He removed his shoes at the entrance without being told. The action felt instinctive, as if his body remembered the rule even if his mind had not consciously recalled it. His footsteps softened immediately, absorbed by the floor. The older woman placed his bag near the wall and gestured gently toward the main room. "You can rest," she said. "The room facing the sea is ready." Her voice held no urgency. Every word seemed placed carefully, leaving space around it. He inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." She did not ask where he had come from, or how long he planned to stay. Instead, she moved toward the kitchen, her steps unhurried, as if the day itself had plenty of time. He walked toward the room she had indicated. Sliding the door open, he found a space almost empty. A low table stood near the center, its surface smooth from years of use. A folded futon rested neatly against the wall. The far side of the room opened wide onto the sea, separated only by a wooden veranda and the open air beyond. There was no glass between him and the sound of the waves. He stepped closer. From here, the sea filled his vision. The horizon lay calm and steady, the surface of the water reflecting the sky's slow shift toward morning blue. Waves reached the shore with soft persistence, dissolving into white foam before retreating again. He sat down on the floor, legs folded naturally beneath him, and let his gaze rest on the water. Minutes passed, or perhaps longer. Time seemed to loosen its grip here. Without clocks or schedules, the moments flowed together, guided only by the rhythm of the sea and the movement of light across the room. Eventually, he became aware of other sounds: the distant cry of a seabird, the faint rustle of pine needles behind the house, the subtle clink of ceramic from the kitchen. The woman returned carrying a tray. She set it down quietly near him. A simple meal rested upon it: steamed rice, grilled fish, a small bowl of soup. Steam rose gently, carrying warmth into the room. "You must be hungry," she said. "I am," he replied. "Thank you." She sat across from him, leaving space between them. They ate without speaking for a while, the only sounds the soft movement of chopsticks and the sea beyond. The food tasted uncomplicated and grounding, as though it belonged to this place rather than having been prepared for him specifically. Each bite felt steady, familiar, even comforting. After a time, he spoke. "This house, it feels like it has been here for a long time." She smiled slightly. "Long enough to stop counting." He nodded. "And you?" She looked toward the sea before answering. "Long enough to listen." No more explanation followed, and none was needed. When the meal was finished, she gathered the dishes and stood. "You may sleep whenever you wish," she said. "The waves are gentle today." "I can hear that," he said. She paused at the doorway and added, "If you wake during the night, don't be surprised. The sea speaks more clearly then." He met her gaze briefly. "I'll listen." She nodded once and left him alone. The day unfolded quietly. Light shifted across the room, changing the color of the tatami from pale gold to muted amber. The sea darkened slightly as clouds drifted overhead, then brightened again as they passed. He lay down on the futon in the afternoon, not because he was tired, but because rest felt appropriate. The futon supported him gently, neither too firm nor too soft, as if it had learned the shape of many bodies before his. As he closed his eyes, the sound of the waves moved closer in his awareness. Each wave arrived, lingered for a moment, then withdrew. There was no urgency, no insistence. Just repetition, steady and reassuring. His breathing began to follow the same pattern. In and out. arrive and retreat. He drifted into sleep without resistance. When he awoke, the room was darker. The sky outside had shifted into deep blue, and the sea reflected the moonlight in soft, broken lines. The air carried a faint chill now, and the scent of night-blooming plants drifted in from the hills. He sat up slowly, feeling rested but not fully awake, as though part of him still lingered somewhere between worlds. The waves sounded different now. Not louder, but deeper. Their rhythm is slower, their presence more pronounced, as if each movement carried intention. He stepped onto the veranda barefoot, the wooden boards cool beneath his feet. The night air wrapped around him gently. For a long while, he stood there, listening. The waves whispered not in words, but in patterns. Rise and fall, advance and release. A language without meaning, yet full of understanding. A memory stirred again. Not an image this time, but a feeling, a sense of having once stood here before, under a similar sky, listening to the same sea. Whether that memory belonged to him, or to the place itself, he could not say. Behind him, the house remained quiet, its presence steady and watchful. Ahead of him, the sea continued its endless conversation with the shore. He breathed deeply, letting the sound wash through him. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing he needed to remember. Nothing he needed to prepare for. There was only this moment. And the waves, whispering, carried him once more toward rest. Chapter 3: Footsteps along the morning tide. Morning arrived without announcement. There was no sudden brightness, no sharp boundary between night and day. Instead, the darkness thinned gradually, like mist lifting from the surface of the world. The sky lightened by degrees, and the sea responded in kind, its deep blues softening into silver and pale gray. He awoke before the sun had fully risen. The room was cool and still. The futon beneath him held the faint warmth of sleep, and for a moment he remained where he was, listening. The waves had not changed their rhythm overnight. If anything, they sounded calmer now, their movement smoother, as if satisfied. He sat up slowly and folded the futon with care, placing it against the wall as he had found it. The simple order of the action felt grounding, a way of aligning himself with the quiet discipline of the house. Stepping outside, he found the veranda damp with dew. The wooden boards were cool under his bare feet, carrying the night's memory. Beyond them, the beach stretched wide and empty, its surface smooth except for the delicate markings left by wind and tide. The older woman was already awake. She stood near the edge of the sand, facing the sea, her silhouette still and composed. She did not turn when she sensed his presence, but she spoke softly, as if continuing a thought already begun. "The tide is low," she said. "It's a good time to walk." He joined her without hurry. They stood side by side for a moment, watching as the water withdrew, revealing dark rocks and shallow pools that reflected the brightening sky. "I used to walk here often," he said, surprising himself with the admission. She nodded. Places like this remember footsteps. They began to walk along the shoreline. Their pace was unforced, neither slow nor fast. The sand shifted gently beneath their feet, cool and firm near the water's edge. Each step left a mark that lingered briefly before the sea softened it away. The town lay quiet behind them. From this distance, it appeared even smaller, almost tentative against the wide presence of the sea and hills. Smoke rose faintly from a few chimneys, dissolving into the morning air. As they walked, the woman spoke of small things. She pointed out a cluster of shells arranged by the tide, their surfaces smooth and pale. She mentioned the way the wind changed direction with the seasons, and how the pine trees bent but never broke. He listened without interrupting, letting her words blend with the sound of the waves. At one point, they came upon a tide pool nestled between rocks. The water inside was perfectly still, reflecting the sky so clearly it appeared like a piece of it had been set down among the stones. He stopped. "I remember this," he said quietly. She looked at him then. "Yes," she replied. "You would." He knelt beside the pool and traced the water's surface with one finger. The reflection rippled outward, then settled again. A memory surfaced, not vivid, but unmistakable. He was younger, smaller. He stood here with someone else, their presence warm and close. They had not spoken much. They hadn't needed to. The memory did not hurt. It passed through him like a gentle current, leaving behind only a sense of familiarity. He stood again, and they resumed their walk. The sun rose higher, casting long, pale light across the beach. The sea began its slow return, waves reaching farther with each advance. "Will you stay long?" the woman asked. "I don't know," he answered honestly. She smiled. "The shore doesn't require decisions." They walked until the tide had nearly erased their path. Eventually, they turned back toward the house. As they approached, the woman paused. "I'll prepare tea," she said. "You can rest if you like." "Thank you," he replied. She disappeared inside, leaving him alone on the veranda. He sat down and watched the sea. The light continued to change, shifting from silver to gold, then settling into the gentle clarity of morning. Birds crossed the sky in unhurried arcs. Far out, the surface of the water moved in long, steady lines. He felt something within him begin to loosen. It was not relief exactly, nor happiness. It was more like the easing of a knot he had carried for so long that he had stopped noticing it. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the woman had returned with 2 cups of tea. She set one beside him. They drank in silence. The tea was warm and slightly bitter, grounding. Its steam mingled with the sea air, rising and vanishing. As the day settled into its quiet rhythm, he understood something not as a thought, but as a certainty. This place did not ask him to remember everything. It did not demand that he let go of everything either. It simply offered space. Space to walk. Space to listen. Space to sleep. And in that space, the waves continued to whisper, shaping each moment gently, patiently, as they always had. Chapter 4: The Stillness of Noon. By noon, the world had settled into a deeper quiet. The sun stood high above the sea, its light spreading evenly across the shore without glare or harshness. Clouds drifted slowly, thin and pale, softening the sky. The waves continued their steady rhythm, unchanged by the hour, as if the sea itself had little interest in marking time. Inside the house, the air grew warmer. Shadows shortened and gathered close to the walls. The tatami absorbed the light, giving the room a muted, golden calm. Even sound seemed to move more slowly, as though the heat had gently thickened the air. He remained seated near the open side of the room, facing the sea. There was no particular reason to move. No need to fill the hours with activity. The stillness felt complete on its own, not empty, but full in a quiet way. From the town behind the house came faint signs of life. A bicycle passed along the road, its bell ringing once before fading. Somewhere farther away, a door slid open and closed. A voice called briefly, then fell silent again. These sounds did not intrude. They simply passed through the space, acknowledged, and released. The woman moved quietly through the house, her presence gentle and unobtrusive. She wiped a low table, rearranged a few objects, and opened a window on the opposite side to let the breeze pass through. Each action seemed less like a task and more like a continuation of listening. At one point, she paused near him. "The light is strong today," she said. "It's a good hour for doing nothing." He smiled faintly. "I think I'm learning that." She nodded, satisfied, and continued on her way. The sea shimmered under the sun, its surface broken into countless fragments of light. Watching it required no effort. His eyes followed the movement naturally, drifting from wave to wave without settling on any single one. Thoughts came and went, but none stayed long enough to take shape. A memory would surface: a road, a room, a voice, but before it could sharpen, it softened again, dissolving back into the larger calm. There was no resistance, no attempt to hold or reject anything. The shore seemed to encourage this gentleness. He lay down on the tatami, one arm resting loosely at his side. The ceiling above him was plain, its wooden beams darkened with age. Sunlight reached it indirectly, shifting slowly as the hours passed. His breathing slowed. Outside, the tide reached its peak and began its gradual retreat. The sound of the waves changed subtly, each arrival now followed by a longer pause, as if the sea were considering its next movement more carefully. He drifted into a light sleep. It was not the deep rest of night, but a shallow, floating kind of sleep, where awareness lingered just beneath the surface. In this state, he could still hear the waves, still feel the warmth of the air, still sense the quiet presence of the house around him. In his sleep, he dreamed of walking. Not through a place he recognized, but along a stretch of shore that felt endless. The sea was always to his left, the land to his right. He walked without destination, without fatigue. Sometimes he walked alone. Sometimes there was someone beside him, their form indistinct, their presence comforting. The dream did not demand interpretation. It passed through him like the tide, leaving only a trace of calm in its wake. When he woke, the sun had begun its slow descent. The light had shifted again, growing softer, angled now in a way that cast long shadows across the floor. The heat of the day eased, replaced by a gentle coolness carried in from the sea. He sat up, feeling refreshed. The woman was seated near the doorway, mending something small with steady hands. She looked up when she sensed him awake. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Just enough." She smiled. "That's the best kind." They shared a quiet moment, listening together as the afternoon moved toward evening. Outside, the sea continued its endless conversation with the shore. Waves arrived, paused, and withdrew, each one slightly different from the last, yet all part of the same unbroken rhythm. As the light softened further, he became aware of a subtle shift within himself. The urgency he had once carried, though he could no longer recall its source, had faded. In its place was a gentle attentiveness, a readiness to notice small changes. The way the air cooled, the way shadows lengthened, the way the sound of the waves deepened as the day drew to a close. Nothing needed to be decided. Nothing needed to be named. The shore did not ask for conclusions. It simply held the space where time could stretch, soften, and rest just as he now did, breathing in time with the waves, letting the quiet of noon dissolve slowly into the promise of evening. Chapter 5. When evening returns to the sea. The evening approached without urgency. The sun lowered itself slowly toward the horizon, its light thinning and warming as it went. The sea accepted the change without resistance, its surface shifting from bright silver to deeper shades of blue and amber. Each wave caught the fading light briefly, then released it back into the growing calm. The air cooled. It carried with it the scent of salt and damp sand, mingled with the faint, earthy sweetness of plants from the hills. The breeze moved gently through the open house, stirring the paper screens just enough to remind them of its presence. The woman began preparing the evening meal. There was no rush in her movements. She washed rice, sliced vegetables, and tended a small pot on the stove. Each sound, water running, a knife touching wood, a lid settling into place, was soft and unforced. He watched for a while, then stepped outside. The beach had changed since morning. The tide had returned, covering the sand he had walked on earlier, smoothing away any remaining traces of footprints. The shoreline now glistened in the low light, reflecting the sky in long, wavering lines. He walked barefoot along the water's edge. The sand was cooler now, firm beneath his feet. Each wave reached him gently, brushing his ankles before withdrawing again. The sensation anchored him to the moment, steady and reassuring. Farther along the shore, the rocks cast long shadows. Tide pools reflected the sky's shifting colors, soft pinks, muted golds, deepening blues. He paused occasionally, not because there was something specific to observe, but because stopping felt natural. As the sun neared the horizon, the world grew quieter. Birds settled into the trees. The distant sounds from the town faded. Even the waves seemed to slow, their rhythm deepening, stretching the space between each arrival. When the sun finally touched the sea, there was no fanfare. It slipped into the water gradually, its light dissolving across the surface until only a faint glow remained, lingering at the edge of the sky. He stood still, watching. Something within him responded to the moment, not with excitement or sorrow, but with recognition. As if this daily return of evening to the sea was something he had witnessed many times before, in many different ways. Behind him, the woman called softly, "Dinner is ready." He turned and made his way back to the house. They ate together in the dimming light. The meal was simple, warm, and filling. Conversation was minimal, but comfortable. Afterward, she lit a small lamp. Its glow was gentle, casting soft shadows that moved slowly across the walls as the flame flickered. Night settled in. The sky deepened to indigo, then to near black, scattered with stars that appeared one by one, unhurried. The sea reflected them faintly, breaking their light into fragments with each movement. He returned to the veranda, wrapping a light layer around his shoulders. The air was cool now, but not cold. The waves sounded different again. Not louder, but fuller, each one carrying the weight of the day, releasing it quietly onto the shore. He listened. In the darkness, memories came more easily. They rose without force, appearing briefly before drifting away. A hand held once. A road walked long ago. A voice calling his name. None of them demanded anything from him. They passed through like the tide, leaving behind only a sense of continuity, a feeling that all moments, past and present, were part of the same slow movement. Inside, the woman moved about, preparing the house for the night. She extinguished unnecessary lights, closed some shutters, and left others open to the sea. When she joined him again, she spoke softly. "The night is clear," she said. "It will be a good one for sleeping." "I believe you," he replied. She nodded. "The sea agrees." They stood together for a moment, listening. Then she wished him good night and retreated inside. He remained where he was, breathing in the cool air, letting the sound of the waves fill the spaces within him that had once been crowded with thought. When he finally lay down, the room was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight slipping in from the open side. He closed his eyes. The waves whispered, steady and patient. Sleep came easily, carrying him gently, as the shore continued to hold its quiet vigil, unchanging, attentive, and calm. Chapter 6: The Depth of Night and What It Holds. Night deepened. The sky stretched wide and dark above the shore, its stars steady and distant. The moon hung low, pale and unhurried, casting a soft path of light across the sea. That light broke and reformed endlessly as the waves moved, never holding a single shape for long. Inside the house, the darkness was gentle. Shadows rested where they belonged, settled and calm. The air was cool, carrying the steady breath of the sea through the open side of the room. Nothing stirred unnecessarily. Even the house seemed to sleep lightly, attentive rather than unconscious. He lay on the futon, eyes closed, listening. The waves were closer now, not in distance, but in presence. Each one arrived with a low, rounded sound, then withdrew slowly, leaving behind a quiet space before the next followed. There was comfort in that space. It allowed his thoughts to loosen further, to drift without direction. He did not try to follow them. He let them pass, like clouds moving across the night sky. At times, he felt as though he were not lying in the room at all, but floating somewhere between the house and the sea. The boundaries of his body softened. His breathing matched the rhythm beyond the veranda. In that in-between state, memory took on a different texture. He did not see scenes or faces clearly. Instead, he sensed emotions, warmth, loss, familiarity moving through him like slow currents. They did not collide or overwhelm. They simply existed, acknowledged, and allowed. One memory lingered a little longer than the others. He was standing on this shore at night, much like now. Someone stood beside him, close enough that their presence could be felt without being seen. They did not speak. The sea did not need them to. The feeling was not sorrowful. It was calm, complete. The memory faded gently, leaving behind a sense of gratitude he could not fully explain. The waves continued. Outside, the tide had turned again, beginning its gradual retreat. The sound shifted subtly, growing softer, more spacious, as if the sea were exhaling. He became aware of another sound, a faint, rhythmic creak from the house as the temperature changed. Wood adjusting. Paper screens are settling. These sounds did not interrupt the quiet. They belonged to it. Time lost its edges. Minutes and hours blended, marked only by changes in light and sound. The moon climbed higher, then slowly began its descent. The stars wheeled imperceptibly overhead. He drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he surfaced into awareness, the world was exactly as it had been, unchanged, dependable. Each time he slipped back under, he carried that steadiness with him. At some point, he sensed movement nearby. The woman passed softly through the house, checking doors, adjusting a shutter, pausing briefly at the open side of the room. She did not wake him. She did not need to. She listened to the waves, as she had done countless nights before. Then she moved on, her presence fading as quietly as it had come. Near the deepest part of night, when even the sea seemed to lower its voice, he slept more deeply. In that sleep, there were no dreams. There was only a sense of being held by the sound of the waves, by the steadiness of the shore, by the quiet understanding of a place that asked for nothing and offered rest in return. When the night began to loosen its hold, he stirred. The darkness lightened almost imperceptibly. The sea shifted once more, its rhythm adjusting to the coming morning. He remained still, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. There was no need to rise yet. The shore would speak again soon. Chapter 7. Before the First Light. Before the first light, the world held its breath. The sky was no longer fully dark, yet it had not begun to brighten. It rested in a quiet suspension, where night and morning touched without crossing. The sea reflected this uncertainty, its surface dim and muted, as though it too were waiting. He lay awake, eyes open now, though the room was still mostly shadow. The waves sounded distant and close at the same time. Their rhythm remained steady, but there was a subtle anticipation within it, a sense of preparation. Each arrival seemed to pause a fraction longer before retreating, as if listening for something beyond itself. He rose slowly and stepped onto the veranda. The air was cool and crisp against his skin. It carried the faint scent of wet stone and salt, and something else fresh, almost new that came with the nearing dawn. The beach was empty. No footprints marked the sand. The tide had smoothed everything clean during the night, leaving the shore unmarked, untouched, as though the previous day had never been. He walked toward the water and stopped where the sand darkened with moisture. For a long moment, he simply stood there. The horizon was barely visible, a thin suggestion rather than a line. Above it, the sky held a deep, even blue, slowly lightening from within. This hour felt different from all the others. It was not the beginning of the day, not yet. Nor was it the end of the night. It existed outside of those definitions, offering a rare stillness that felt both fragile and enduring. He breathed in deeply. The sound of the waves seemed to move through him rather than around him now, as if the boundary between his listening and the sea's speaking had thinned. A realization formed not suddenly, but gently. He had not come here to remember something specific. Nor had he come to forget. He had come to allow things to settle. Behind him, the house remained quiet, its presence steady and unobtrusive. He could sense the woman inside, awake or asleep, it did not matter. The house and its keeper felt like constant, unchanging points in a world defined by motion. The sky shifted again. A faint band of light appeared at the horizon, pale and cool, barely distinguishable from the sea beneath it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it widened. The waves responded. Their rhythm adjusted subtly, growing a touch quicker, as if welcoming the coming day. The sound became brighter, clearer, carrying with it a quiet promise of movement and life. He took a step closer to the water. The sand was cold, grounding him fully in the present. He felt the small adjustments of his muscles, the balance of his weight, the steady rise and fall of his breath. A memory stirred not of the past, but of the present repeating itself. He realized that this moment would return. Not in the same form, not with the same light or tide, but in essence. This stillness before light existed every day, whether witnessed or not. The thought brought him comfort. As the first true light touched the edge of the sea, the sky began to open. Colors emerged slowly, soft gray, then hints of pale gold. The darkness retreated without resistance. He remained until the sun itself was close to rising. When he finally turned back toward the house, the world had shifted just enough to feel new, but not unfamiliar. The day was ready. And he was, too. Chapter 8. The day unfolds gently. The day unfolded as though it had all the time in the world. Sunlight reached the shore in a soft, even way, warming the sand without urgency. The sea brightened gradually, its surface smoothing into long, gentle lines that stretched toward the horizon. Nothing rushed to begin. Nothing was late. He returned to the house as the woman was setting out breakfast. Steam rose quietly from a pot. The scent of rice and miso filled the room, blending naturally with the sea air. She greeted him with a nod, as if his presence there in the early morning required no comment. "You were up before the light," she said. "Yes," he replied. "It felt right." She smiled slightly. "The shore agrees with that." They ate together in the calm of the new day. The meal was simple, but it carried a sense of completeness, as though it belonged to this hour alone. Afterward, she stepped outside and motioned toward the town. "If you like," she said, "you can walk today. The road will show itself." He understood. He set out alone, following the narrow path that curved away from the house and into the town. The road was quiet but no longer asleep. A few doors stood open. Someone swept the front of their shop, the sound of the broom steady and rhythmic. As he walked, he felt no separation between himself and the place. The houses did not feel closed to him. The air did not feel unfamiliar. Each step seemed guided less by intention and more by an easy alignment with the land. He passed the small shrine near the edge of town. Sunlight filtered through the trees, catching on the stone surface, highlighting patches of moss. He paused briefly, not to pray, but to acknowledge the space. The road continued upward slightly, offering a view back toward the sea. From here, the shore looked distant but present, a wide band of light and movement at the edge of the land. The house by the water was just visible, its shape blending into the landscape. He stood there for a moment, feeling the connection between where he was and where he had been. The town began to stir more fully. A bicycle passed him, its rider offering a quiet greeting. A dog barked once, then settled. Voices carried faintly from a nearby home, rising and falling in an unhurried cadence. None of it demanded his attention. It all simply existed. He continued walking until the road curved again, leading him past small fields and back toward the hills. The air here smelled of earth and grass. Cicadas had not yet begun their song, but the quiet held their promise. Eventually, he turned back. When he returned to the house, the woman was seated near the veranda, watching the sea. "How was the walk?" she asked. "Easy," he said, "as if I'd taken it before." She nodded. "Most paths here are like that." The afternoon approached, bringing with it a familiar stillness. He sat beside her, and together they watched the waves move across the shore. The sun climbed higher, light spreading evenly once more. There was no need to mark the hours. The day did not require it. And as the calm shore continued to whisper, the story moved forward, not toward a conclusion, but deeper into its own quiet unfolding. Chapter 9: What the Sea Does Not Say. The sea spoke without words. It had always done so, long before he arrived, long before anyone thought to listen. Its language was not made of sound alone, but of space, of pauses between waves, of the way the horizon held still, of how light rested briefly on the water before moving on. He sat near the edge of the veranda, watching. The afternoon had settled into a quiet equilibrium. The sun was present but gentle, its warmth softened by a thin veil of clouds. The wind moved just enough to carry the scent of salt and distant greenery, then stilled again. Nothing demanded attention, and yet everything invited it. He noticed how the waves never arrived the same way twice. One reached farther, another fell short. Some broke softly, others dissolved before they could fully form. Still, together, they created a rhythm so consistent it felt eternal. "What are you listening for?" The woman's voice was calm, not intrusive. She had joined him without sound, her presence as natural as the sea's own. "I'm not sure," he said after a moment. "Perhaps nothing." She smiled. "That's often when it speaks most clearly." They watched together. The sea did not explain itself. It did not clarify memories or offer conclusions. It did not ask him to understand. It simply moved. He realized then that much of his life before this place had been spent trying to give shape to things that resisted it, feelings that would not settle, moments that refused meaning unless pressed into it. Here, there was no such pressure. A thought surfaced, quiet and unforced. Some things were meant to remain unspoken. The realization did not feel like surrender. It felt like permission. The woman rose and returned inside, leaving him alone with the water once more. He did not follow. He remained where he was, letting the afternoon stretch. Time passed in subtle shifts. The light changed direction. The breeze cooled slightly. The sound of the waves deepened as the tide began another slow turn. He felt a gentle ache within him, not pain, but the awareness of something long held finally loosening its grip. It moved through him slowly, like warmth leaving a stone at dusk. He did not resist it. He did not chase it. He let it pass. When evening approached again, he stood and walked down to the shore. The sand welcomed his feet, cool and steady. The water reached him softly, brushing his skin before retreating. He stood there until the sky began to darken. The sea offered no answers. And for the first time, he understood that it never needed to. Chapter 10: The Shape of Staying. Staying did not arrive as a decision. It took shape slowly, like the tide finding its line along the shore. There was no moment he could point to and say, "This is when I chose." Instead, the choice seemed to form around him, settling quietly into place. Morning followed night, and night followed morning. The days repeated their gentle rhythm, each one similar, yet never identical. Light shifted. The sea changed its voice. The air carried different scents as the hours passed. He remained. At first, he marked time by small things: the angle of the sun, the warmth of the tatami, the sound of the waves at different hours. Eventually, even these markers softened. The days blended into a single, continuous presence. He helped when there was something to be done. Sometimes the woman asked him to carry water or gather driftwood. Sometimes she said nothing at all, and he understood that there was nothing required. Both felt equally natural. They spoke occasionally, but not often. When they did, it was about simple things: the weather, the tide, the way the wind had shifted overnight. Their words were never heavy. They rested lightly between them, like stones placed carefully so as not to disturb the water. One afternoon, as they sat watching the sea, he spoke. "I think I was running before," he said. She did not ask from what. "Yes," she replied. "Many people are. I don't feel that here." "That's because the shore does not move faster than it needs to." He nodded, understanding. The idea of leaving surfaced from time to time, but it held no urgency. It appeared like a thought passing through, then drifted away, leaving no trace. The house became familiar. He learned its sounds: the way the floor creaked at night, the way the wind passed through certain openings, the subtle shift in tone when rain approached. These sounds no longer drew his attention. They became part of the background of his being. The sea, too, revealed more of itself. He noticed how it carried the memory of storms long after they had passed. how it held calm even when the wind rose, how it never clung to what it released. One evening, as the sun sank low and the water darkened, the woman spoke again. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "Thank you," he replied. "I don't know how long that is." She smiled. "Neither does the sea." They watched the light fade together. In that moment, he felt no need to define his place here. Staying did not require explanation. It simply was. Chapter 11: The Long Memory of Water. Water remembered what land forgot. Not in stories or names, but in motion, in the way waves returned to the same places, shaped the same curves, smoothed the same stones again and again. The sea carried time differently. It did not move forward so much as it moved through. He began to sense this as he spent more days by the shore. When he walked along the beach, he noticed stones half buried in the sand, their surfaces polished and rounded. He imagined how long it must have taken for them to become that way, how many tides, how many storms, how many quiet hours beneath the water's touch. The thought did not overwhelm him. It steadied him. The woman once pointed toward the horizon as they sat together. "The water out there has been here longer than any of us," she said. "And it will be here long after." "Yes," he said. "It feels like it knows that." She nodded. "That's why it's never in a hurry." Some afternoons, he waded into the shallows. The water was cool around his ankles, then his calves, then his knees. Each step was deliberate, mindful of the shifting sand beneath the surface. The sea welcomed him without resistance, adjusting around him easily. Standing there, he felt the gentle pull of the tide, subtle but persistent. It did not try to take him anywhere. It simply reminded him that nothing stayed entirely still. He thought of the past then not as something heavy, but as something fluid. Memories rose and fell like waves. They shaped him, smoothed him, but did not define his edges sharply anymore. What once felt fixed now felt changeable, alive. One evening, as the sky clouded over and the wind picked up slightly, he asked the woman a question. "Have you always lived here?" She considered this before answering. "I have lived near water," she said. "That has always been enough." He accepted the answer without pressing further. That night, rain came softly. It fell in a steady, patient way, darkening the sand, tapping gently against the roof, merging its sound with the waves until it was difficult to tell where one ended, and the other began. He lay listening, wrapped in that layered rhythm. Rain, wave, breath. The sea absorbed the rain without comment, without change. By morning, it would remember none of it, and yet it would be shaped by it all the same. As sleep carried him once more, he understood something quietly, deeply. The shore did not offer escape. It offered continuity. And in that continuity, he found a calm that did not depend on forgetting, but on allowing everything past and present to move, as water always had. Chapter 12: The Quiet Work of Days. Days did their work without drawing attention to themselves. They arrived in familiar shapes: morning light over the sea, the slow warming of air, the steady breathing of the waves, and departed just as quietly. Nothing dramatic marked their passing. And yet, something was always changing. He woke, rested, walked, listened. He helped with small tasks when they appeared. Sweeping sand from the veranda. Carrying water. Setting things back where they belonged. None of it felt like labor. It felt like participation. The woman moved through her routines with the same calm consistency. She never hurried, never delayed. When something needed doing, she did it. When it did not, she sat and listened. Sometimes they shared meals in silence. Sometimes they spoke a little. Once, as they drank tea in the afternoon, he said, "I used to feel like time was something I was losing." She looked at the sea before answering. "Time doesn't disappear," she said. "It only changes its shape." "I think I understand that better now," he said. She smiled, as if that was all that needed to be said. The shore reflected this understanding. Some days the sea was glassy and smooth, reflecting the sky almost perfectly. Other days it carried more motion, waves arriving with greater energy, though never violence. Even then, there was balance. He began to sleep more deeply. Not only at night, but sometimes in the afternoon, lulled by the heat and the sound of water. These sleeps were dreamless, heavy with rest. When he woke, he felt lighter, as though something unseen had been set gently aside. One evening, he noticed how the sound of the waves no longer stood apart from his awareness. It was no longer something he listened to. It was something he listened to. The realization came without ceremony, and it stayed. The quiet work of days continued. Each one smoothed him slightly, the way water smooths stone. Not by force, but by presence. By repetition. By patience. And slowly, without effort, he became part of the rhythm that had always been there, unremarkable, enduring, and calm. Chapter 13: A Change in the Wind. The change was subtle at first. It came not as a shift in light or sound, but as a difference in the air itself. The wind carried a new edge, cooler, drier, slipping across the shore in a way that hinted at movement beyond the horizon. He noticed it early one morning as he stepped outside. The sea looked much the same, its surface calm and steady. but the breeze brushed against his skin differently, lingering for a moment longer before passing on. The woman noticed it too. "The wind is turning," she said. "Not much. Just enough." "Enough for what?" She did not say. Days followed with small variations. Clouds gathered more often, drifting in from the distance and dissolving again. The light lost some of its softness at midday, growing clearer, sharper. At night, the air cooled more quickly. None of it felt disruptive. It felt natural. He continued his walks along the shore, noticing how the sand held the imprint of waves a little longer. How the tide pools reflected the sky with greater clarity. The pine trees behind the beach whispered more often now, their needles responding to the shifting air. One afternoon, he stood watching the horizon as darker clouds formed far out at sea. A storm did not come. The clouds remained distant, holding their shape, reminding him that not every change demanded arrival. That evening, he asked the woman, "Do you notice when things are about to shift?" She considered this. "Yes," she said, "but I don't try to follow it." He nodded. "I think I used to chase it." She smiled gently. "Most people do." The wind continued to change. It brought with it a sense of quiet anticipation, not urgency, not worry, but readiness. As if the shore itself were adjusting its breath, preparing for something it already understood. At night, the waves sounded slightly different. Their rhythm remained steady, but there was a deeper resonance beneath it, a fullness that suggested depth rather than distance. He slept well, and when he woke, he carried with him the feeling that something within him, too, had begun to shift not away from this place, but more fully into it. Chapter 14 The Sound of Rain Approaching. The sound came before the rain itself. It arrived as a subtle thickening of the air, a quiet pressure that softened the distance between things. The horizon lost some of its sharpness, and the sea's surface darkened slightly, as if absorbing the sky's unspoken intention. He noticed the change while standing on the veranda in the afternoon. The waves still moved gently, but their sound carried farther now, deeper and more rounded. Each arrival seemed to linger, as though the water were listening to something beyond the shore. The woman stepped beside him. "It will rain," she said, not as a forecast, but as an observation already fulfilled in spirit. He nodded. "I can hear it." They prepared without haste. Shutters were adjusted, though not fully closed. Windows were aligned to guide the wind rather than resist it. The house responded quietly, settling into a posture that welcomed what was coming. The first drops fell just before evening. They touched the sand lightly, darkening it in scattered patterns. The scent of rain rose immediately, earthy, clean, familiar. Soon the drops grew closer together, their rhythm steady but uninsistent. Rain met sea. The sounds layered gently, water striking water, wave carrying rain, rain dissolving into wave. It became difficult to separate one from the other, and in that blending, the world felt simpler. Inside, the light dimmed. The woman lit a lamp, its glow soft and steady against the gray-blue of the rainlit world beyond. Shadows moved slowly across the walls, their edges softened by the sound outside. They sat together, listening. The rain did not rush. It did not demand shelter. It fell with patience, as though it had learned the rhythm of the shore and chosen to follow it. He felt a familiar loosening within himself. Rain had once made him restless. It had filled him with an urge to move, to seek dryness, to escape its persistence. Here, it asked nothing of him. He could remain. As evening deepened, the rain grew slightly heavier, then eased again. It followed no pattern he could predict, and yet it felt entirely ordered. The sea accepted it all without change. Watching this, he understood something quietly. The shore did not resist what came to it. It did not cling to calm nor reject disruption. It allowed everything to pass through, shaping it gently, then letting it go. When night fell fully, the rain softened again, becoming almost indistinguishable from the waves. He lay down listening to the layered rhythm. Rain, wave, breath. Each sound flowed into the next, carrying him downward into rest. Sleep came easily, wrapped in the understanding that nothing needed to be held tightly, not even calm. Outside, the rain continued its patient conversation with the sea, and the shore listened, as it always had. Chapter 15. After the rain, the shore remains. Morning arrived, cleansed. The rain had passed quietly in the night, leaving behind a world that felt newly rinsed, as though every surface had been given space to breathe again. The air was cool and clear, carrying the faint scent of wet sand and pine needles. He stepped outside just after waking. The beach stretched wide and smooth, darker than usual from the lingering moisture. Small pools of water reflected the sky, their surfaces still and glass-like. The sea itself was calm, its movements gentle, as if resting after its long conversation with the rain. The woman joined him, her footsteps soft. "The shore looks different," he said. "Yes," she replied. "But it's the same." He nodded, understanding. They walked along the beach together. The sand yielded slightly underfoot, cool and firm. Each step left a clear imprint that lasted longer than usual before the tide reached it. The sea approached slowly, reclaiming the shore with unhurried patience. As they walked, he noticed how the colors of the world felt deeper now. The blue of the sea was richer. The green of the hills behind the town is more vivid. Even the gray of the rocks held subtle variations he had not noticed before. Nothing had changed. Everything had. They stopped near a familiar tide pool. The water inside was perfectly still, reflecting the sky with quiet clarity. Raindrops clung to the edges of the stone, catching the light. He looked at his reflection and found it softer than he expected. Not blurred, simply at ease. "I used to think change meant leaving something behind," he said. The woman considered this. "Sometimes it does," she said. "Sometimes it means staying long enough to see it differently." He let the words settle. The day unfolded slowly. Clouds drifted past, thinner now, allowing sunlight to filter through in gentle patterns. The sound of the waves was steady, familiar, comforting. As the afternoon approached, he returned to the house and sat quietly, letting the rhythm of the place guide him once more. The rain had come and gone. The shore remained, and within that constancy, he felt a deeper sense of rest, one that did not depend on the absence of change, but on the knowledge that whatever passed, the rhythm beneath it endured. Chapter 16: The Shape of Quiet Joy. Quiet joy did not announce itself. It did not arrive with laughter or excitement, nor did it ask to be named. It appeared instead as a gentle widening of the chest, a softening behind the eyes, a sense that nothing in this moment was missing. He noticed it one afternoon as he sat alone on the veranda. The sea was calm, the sky lightly clouded. The waves moved with a familiar steadiness, their sound neither loud nor faint, simply present. He realized that he had been sitting there for some time without thinking about anything in particular. And that felt good. The joy was not sharp or bright. It had no edge. It felt rounded, worn smooth, like a stone shaped by years of water. It did not pull his attention toward the future, nor did it anchor him to the past. It stayed exactly where he was. Later, when the woman brought tea, she paused and looked at him for a moment longer than usual. "You look settled," she said. "I feel even," he replied, searching for the right word. "As if I'm not leaning toward anything." She smiled. "That's a good balance." They drank their tea in silence. The warmth of the cup in his hands, the faint bitterness of the tea. The sound of the waves, each sensation stood clearly on its own, yet blended seamlessly with the others. There was no hierarchy among them. Nothing demanded more attention than the rest. In the days that followed, this quiet joy appeared again and again. It surfaced while he walked along the shore, watching gulls trace slow arcs through the sky. It appeared while he helped with simple tasks, feeling the weight of objects, the texture of wood, the rhythm of movement. It settled beside him at night, as he lay listening to the sea breathe in the darkness. The joy did not make him restless. It did not ask him to preserve it or fear its loss. It existed freely, like the tide arriving, lingering, receding, and always returning in some form. One evening, as the sky turned pale gold and the water reflected its light, he spoke. "I think I know why this place feels different," he said. The woman waited. "It doesn't ask me to be anyone other than who I am right now." She nodded. "The shore is very patient." The sun slipped lower, and the light softened. He felt the joy again, not stronger than before, not weaker. Simply present. And in that presence, he understood that calm was not emptiness. It was fullness without excess. Chapter 17. When the tide turns again. The tide turned without ceremony. There was no signal, no moment he could point to and say that this was when it happened. The sea simply adjusted its rhythm, and the shore followed, as it always had. He noticed it in the sound first. The waves still arrived gently, but there was a subtle shift beneath their calm, a deeper pull, a longer pause before each retreat. It was not a disturbance. It was a reminder that movement never truly stopped, even in the most settled places. He stood at the water's edge one morning, watching the line where sea met sand. The horizon was clear. The sky is wide and pale. Everything appeared as it had the day before. And yet, something felt slightly different, like a breath held a fraction longer before release. Behind him, the woman approached. "The tide is changing," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied. "I can feel it." They walked together along the shore, their steps unhurried. The sand was cool, firm beneath their feet, shaped by the night's retreating water. "Does it mean anything?" he asked. She smiled. "It always does. But not in the same way twice." He considered this. The idea of movement no longer unsettled him. Where once it might have stirred uncertainty or fear, now it felt familiar, almost comforting. Change, he realized, did not always mean departure. Sometimes it simply meant adjustment. They stopped near the rocks where the tide pools formed. The water inside them was in motion now, responding to the shifting sea beyond. Reflections wavered gently, never settling for long. He watched in silence. A thought rose, not urgent, not demanding. There would come a time when he would leave this place. The thought did not carry weight. It did not feel like a loss. It felt like acknowledgement. The woman seemed to sense it. "The shore doesn't keep," she said. "It only holds for a while." "I know," he replied. They stood together as the tide continued its quiet work, reshaping the edge of the land grain by grain. Later that day, he walked alone. He followed the familiar curve of the beach, noticing how the light shifted across the water, how the wind traced patterns in the sand. Each detail felt clear, present, and complete. He was not preparing to leave. He was simply aware that nothing stayed unchanged, not even stillness. That night, as he lay listening to the waves, he felt no need to decide anything. The tide would continue to turn. And when it did, he would move with it. Chapter 18: The Space Between Departures. There was a space that existed between staying and leaving. It was not marked by bags packed or plans made. It was not defined by farewells or beginnings. It was quieter than that, a pause, a widening of time where neither direction held urgency. He found himself living in that space. Days continued as they always had. Morning light spilled across the sea. The tide advanced and withdrew. The woman moved through her routines, steady and attentive. Nothing on the surface suggested transition. And yet, beneath it all, there was a gentle awareness. He noticed it in himself when he walked along the shore. Each step felt deliberate, but not final. Each glance at the horizon carried no longing, only recognition. The space between departures felt surprisingly full. It held attention without tension, presence without attachment. He could enjoy the warmth of the sun, the sound of the waves, the quiet companionship of the house, without needing them to last forever. One afternoon, as they shared tea, he spoke. "I think I'm learning how to be here without holding on." The woman nodded. "That's a rare thing. Is it?" he asked. She smiled. "Only because people try to decide too quickly." They sat together in silence, the sound of the sea filling the space where words might have been. In the days that followed, he felt a deepening ease. He did not count how long he had been there. He did not imagine what would come next. He allowed each day to arrive and depart on its own terms. At night, his sleep was steady and deep. The waves no longer carried him into thought or memory. They carried him to rest. The space between departures did not feel empty. It felt complete. Chapter 19: What is carried forward. What he would carry forward did not take shape as a list. It was not made of objects, nor of lessons that could be clearly stated. It existed more quietly than that, woven into the way he now moved through each moment. He noticed it first in his breathing. It had slowed, deepened, and found a rhythm that felt natural rather than forced. Even when he was not listening to the sea directly, its cadence seemed to remain with him, guiding the rise and fall of his chest. He noticed it in his attention. Small things now held space easily: the sound of wind passing through grass, the weight of a cup in his hands, the pause between one wave and the next. He no longer felt the need to move quickly past these moments. They did not feel like delays. They felt complete. The woman watched him one evening as he stood on the veranda, gazing toward the darkening water. "You've changed," she said, not as an observation to be examined, but as a simple truth. "Yes," he replied, "but not in a way I can explain." She smiled. "That's how it usually is." They sat together as night settled. The sky deepened into familiar shades of blue and black. Stars appeared, reflected faintly on the moving surface of the sea. The waves whispered, as they always had, their sound unchanged by time or understanding. He realized then that he would not carry this place with him as memory alone. He would carry it as a way of listening. The shore had not given him answers. It had not resolved his past or defined his future. Instead, it had shown him how to remain present within uncertainty, how to rest within movement. That understanding did not belong only here. It would move with him, wherever he went. Later, alone, he walked one last time along the water's edge for the night. The sand was cool beneath his feet. The tide brushed his skin gently, then withdrew. The horizon held steady, offering no promises and no refusals. He stood there until the night air cooled further, until the sound of the waves felt fully familiar again. When he turned back toward the house, there was no heaviness in the motion. Only readiness. Chapter 20: The Morning That Opens. Morning arrived without insistence. The light spread slowly across the horizon, pale and even, touching the surface of the sea before reaching the shore. The waves greeted it with the same gentle rhythm they had always kept, unchanged by the significance he now sensed in the day. He woke early. The house was quiet, holding the last traces of night within its walls. He moved carefully, not out of necessity, but out of respect for the stillness. Outside, the air was cool. The beach stretched before him, familiar and open. The tide was low, revealing more of the shore than usual, as though offering space rather than retreat. He walked. Each step felt grounded, complete. There was no rush, no need to measure the distance. He simply followed the curve of the land, letting the sound of the sea guide his pace. When he returned, the woman was waiting. She stood near the doorway, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady. "It's time," she said. "Yes," he replied. There was no sadness in the word. They did not speak much after that. Some things did not need to be named. The understanding between them had settled into a quiet certainty, one that did not require reinforcement. He gathered what little he had brought with him. The house did not feel emptied by the act. It felt unchanged, ready to continue its own rhythm once he was gone. At the edge of the property, he paused. The sea was visible beyond the trees, its sound constant and calm. "Thank you," he said. The woman inclined her head. "Walk gently." He smiled. Then he turned and began to move away, following the path that led inland. The sound of the waves softened behind him, not disappearing, but becoming part of a larger field of quiet. Birds stirred in the trees. Wind moved through the leaves. The morning opened around him. Each step carried him forward, not away. And somewhere behind him, the shore remained waves whispering, unchanged, patient, and endlessly present. Epilogue, where the sound returns. Long after he had gone, the shore continued. Waves arrived and departed. Light shifted. The wind changed its direction. Rain fell, and the sea accepted it. Nothing held his absence. Nothing needed to. Yet sometimes, in the shape of a pause between waves, in the way the wind softened before turning, there was a trace of something. Familiar, a rhythm carried forward, echoing quietly beyond the edge of the shore. And when he walked elsewhere, in other places, he sometimes paused without knowing why. He listened, and in that listening, the calm shore returned. A window lit in the sleeping town. Prologue, the light that remained. The town rested in the low valley between the hills, as it had for generations, cradled by slopes covered in cedar and pine. During the day, its presence was modest and almost unremarkable. A single main road curved gently through it, following the line of an old river that had long ago learned to move quietly. Small houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their tiled roofs darkened by years of rain and sun. Shops closed early, their shutters painted in colors that had softened with age. But at night, the town changed in ways that were subtle and easily missed. The mountains gathered darkness first. Their outlines dissolved into the sky until they became a deeper shade of night itself. Then the streets emptied, one by one, as doors slid shut and lights were turned off with familiar gestures. Windows dimmed. Televisions murmured briefly and then fell silent. Even the insects seemed to agree on a shared volume, their sounds blending into a steady, almost breathing rhythm. From above, if someone had been watching, the town would have appeared as a scattering of faint lights, each one marking a life settling into rest. All but one. Near the edge of the residential district, where the houses grew slightly farther apart and the road narrowed, a single window remained lit. Its light was not bright. It did not spill dramatically into the street. It was a gentle, steady glow, the color of a lamp turned low, as if it were aware of the hour and wished to disturb no one. This window belonged to a small house that looked much like the others. 2 stories, wooden frame, narrow garden bordered by stones. There was nothing about it that would draw attention in daylight. Even now, at night, the house seemed content to blend into the darkness. Except for that one window. Inside, the room was quiet. The air held the faint scent of old paper and warm wood. The lamp stood on a low desk near the window, illuminating a small circle of space. Beyond that circle, the room faded gently into shadow, as if it did not need to be fully seen. The person in the room moved slowly, unhurried, as though time itself had agreed to loosen its grip. There was no urgency, no goal that needed to be reached before sleep. The lamp had been turned on not to fight the night, but to accompany it. Outside, the town slept. Inside, the light remained. It was not unusual, exactly. In any town, there were nights when someone stayed awake longer than the rest. Someone reading. Someone thinking. Someone simply listening to the quiet. Yet there was something about this particular light that seemed to belong to the night rather than interrupt it. It felt less like wakefulness and more like a pause. The window did not glow with loneliness, nor with restlessness. It glowed with presence, with the simple fact of being awake while others dreamed. And so, as the hours moved forward without being counted, the light stayed on, and the sleeping town accepted it as part of its night. Chapter 1: The Shape of Quiet Days. Morning arrived in the town without announcement. There was no sharp division between night and day, no sudden brightness. Instead, the darkness softened. The sky shifted from deep blue to gray, and then to a pale color that seemed unsure of itself. Birds began to stir, their calls tentative at first, as if testing whether it was truly time. The house with the lit window now looked like any other. The lamp had been turned off at some point before dawn. The window reflected only the sky. The room inside held the stillness left behind after a long night of quiet wakefulness. The person who lived there rose later than most. His name was not something the town spoke often, not because it was forgotten, but because it was rarely needed. He lived alone, worked alone, and passed through his days without drawing attention. In a place like this town, such a life was not unusual. It was, in fact, easy. He woke slowly, as if surfacing from deep water. There was no alarm clock. The morning light reached him through thin curtains, resting gently on the floor before climbing the walls. He lay still for a time, listening. The town had a morning sound, just as it had a night one. Distant footsteps. The low engine of a delivery truck. A door opening, then closing. Somewhere nearby, a kettle was set on a stove. These sounds did not demand his attention. They were simply there, confirming that the day had begun, whether he participated immediately or not. Eventually, he sat up. The room was small and orderly, though not deliberately so. Things were placed where they had naturally come to rest over time. A bookshelf against one wall held novels, essays, old travel guides, and notebooks with blank pages still waiting. The desk near the window remained as it had been left the night before, a book closed gently, a pen placed beside it. He moved through the room with practiced familiarity, dressing without thought, opening the window just enough to let fresh air in. The smell of damp earth and leaves drifted inside. Somewhere beyond the houses, the hills waited, unchanged. Breakfast was simple. Rice reheated quietly. Tea was poured and left to steep a little longer than necessary. He ate without distraction, standing by the kitchen window and watching the street. A woman walked past with a bag of groceries. A man on a bicycle slowed to avoid a cat crossing the road. These were not events so much as confirmations. The town was awake now. He left the house mid-morning. The street greeted him with a kind of familiarity that did not require acknowledgement. The shop owners knew him by sight, if not by name. He nodded as he passed the bakery, where the smell of bread hung warmly in the air. He did not go in. He rarely did. His destination was not far. At the edge of town stood a small public building that had once been busier. The library was modest, its collection limited but carefully maintained. It opened later than libraries in larger cities and closed earlier. Its purpose was not to impress but to exist. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was cool and quiet, even in the morning. Sunlight filtered through high windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted without direction. The shelves stood in neat rows, their contents unchanged for long stretches of time. This was where he worked. Not as a librarian in the traditional sense, but as a caretaker of sorts. He maintained the records, repaired damaged books, and ensured that the space remained welcoming to whoever chose to enter. Some days, no one did. He liked those days. They allowed the library to exist as it wanted to, a place of waiting. A place where time slowed simply by being inside. He spent the morning repairing the spine of a book that had been borrowed and returned many times over the years. His hands moved with care, each motion small and deliberate. There was no rush. The book had waited this long, it could wait a little longer. Occasionally, someone entered. A student looking for a quiet place to study. An elderly man is reading the same newspaper he reads every day. A child wandering the shelves without a clear purpose. He acknowledged them with a nod or a soft greeting, then returned to his work. Words passed through his days constantly, yet he spoke very few of them. By afternoon, the light shifted, and the shadows inside the library grew longer. He closed the windows to keep the cool air in. Outside, clouds gathered lazily over the hills, suggesting rain that might or might not arrive. When the library closed, he locked the door and stood for a moment on the steps. The town stretched before him, unchanged and familiar. He could walk any street without thinking, his feet knowing the way on their own. He began to move, following the road that curved gently toward his house. The rain did not come. Instead, the evening arrived quietly, as it always did. The sky deepened. Lights flickered on behind windows. The smell of cooking drifted through the air, then faded as meals ended, and dishes were washed. He returned home and prepared dinner, simple and warm. He ate slowly, listening as the town settled into itself once more. Later, when the dishes were done and the room had dimmed, he turned on the lamp by the window. The light filled the small space without intruding on the night beyond the glass. He sat at the desk, opened the book he had been reading, and continued from where he had left off. The words moved gently, one after another, carrying no urgency. He did not read to reach the end. He read to remain where he was. Outside, the town slept. Inside, the light stayed on. And so the days passed, shaped by quiet routines and unspoken understanding. Nothing dramatic disturbed the flow of time. Yet within that stillness, something subtle began to form. Not a change, exactly. More like a deepening. The window would light each night. The town would accept it. And the quiet would continue, holding everything gently in place. Chapter 2: What the town remembered without speaking. The town had a way of remembering things without ever discussing them. There were no plaques to mark significant events, no signs to explain why certain buildings stood empty or why some streets curved in a particular way. Memory existed instead in habits, the way people avoided a shortcut after dark. The way a shop closed a little earlier than necessary. The way no one questioned the light that stayed on in one particular window each night. These things were not secrets. They were not topics. For the man in the small house, the town's unspoken memory felt like a familiar presence, something that moved alongside his own days. He had grown up here, left for a time, and then returned when the city became too loud, too sharp around the edges. The town had not asked him why he came back. It had simply made space. That morning, he woke with the sense that something had shifted, though nothing had changed. The light through the curtains looked the same. The air carried the same faint scent of earth and trees. The town sounds arrived in their usual order. Yet as he lay still, listening, he felt a quiet awareness, as if he were slightly more awake than usual. He did not hurry to identify the feeling. After breakfast, he left the house and walked toward the library, taking a longer route than usual. This road passed closer to the river, which ran shallow and clear, its surface broken occasionally by smooth stones. The water moved slowly, untroubled by urgency. He stopped on the small bridge and leaned against the railing. Below him, the river reflected the pale sky. Leaves drifted along the surface, gathering briefly near the edges before continuing. He watched without expectation, letting his thoughts remain unformed. This bridge had always been here. As a child, he had crossed it daily. As an adult, he had crossed it without thinking. Yet now, standing still, he felt its age, its patience. Time in the town did not move forward so much as it settled. At the library, the day unfolded much like any other. He sorted returned books, reshelved volumes that had wandered slightly from their intended places, and adjusted a chair near the window, so that it caught the light better. The student arrived, then left. The elderly man read his newspaper. A woman he recognized vaguely browsed the shelves and borrowed a book of essays. She paused at the desk. "I always forget how quiet it is here," she said softly, almost apologetically. He smiled slightly. "It stays that way most days." "That's good," she replied. "There aren't many places like this anymore." She took her book and left, the door closing gently behind her. The quiet returned without resistance. In the afternoon, as shadows lengthened, he found himself drawn to a section of the library he rarely visited. The local history shelf held thin volumes bound in fading covers. They were not popular. Most residents felt they already knew the town's story, or believed that knowing it would change nothing. He pulled one book free and opened it. The pages smelled faintly of dust and ink. The text was sparse and factual. Dates, names, and small events recorded without commentary. A new road has been built. A school expanded. a flood that reached only the lowest fields. He turned the pages slowly. Near the middle of the book, he stopped. There was a photograph, grainy and slightly blurred. It showed the town from a higher vantage point, perhaps taken from the hillside. The river curved as it always had. The roofs clustered tightly together. And near the edge of the image, almost lost in shadow, stood the house with the narrow garden. His house. At the time the photograph was taken, it had belonged to someone else. He knew that, though he could not recall how he knew. The text beside the image mentioned nothing remarkable. Just a note about residential development in that area. Yet he found himself lingering. He closed the book carefully and returned it to its place. That evening, as the town dimmed and lights went out one by one, he turned on the lamp by the window earlier than usual. The glow filled the room with a familiar warmth. He did not read. Instead, he sat quietly, hands resting on the desk, and looked out through the glass. The street was empty. The air held the promise of cooler nights to come. Across the way, another window flickered on briefly, then off again. A television sound rose and fell. Somewhere, a door closed. The town was entering its night. He thought of the photograph. Of the way the house had stood there long before he arrived. Of how many nights the window had been dark, and how many times it might have been lit by someone else, for reasons entirely unknown. The light did not belong to him alone. This thought did not trouble him. If anything, it felt comforting. As the hours passed, he remained awake, letting his thoughts move freely, without direction. He did not force memories to surface, but some arrived on their own. A night years ago, when he had returned to the town after a long absence. He had stood outside the house, keys in hand, unsure whether turning the lock would feel like an ending or a beginning. The house had been empty then, quiet in a different way. He remembered turning on the light for the first time. It had felt like an introduction. Outside, the town had accepted it without comment. The days that followed had been similar to the ones he lived now, quiet, repetitive, gentle. Yet beneath them ran a subtle current, a sense that the act of staying awake, of keeping the light on, was not meaningless. It was an acknowledgement of time passing, of presence, of the simple fact that someone was here, observing, even as the town slept. In the days that followed, he noticed small things more clearly. The way the river's sound changed after rain. The way the library shelves seemed to shift as books were borrowed and returned. The way the town's rhythm slowed even further as summer began to fade. One evening, as he walked home, he encountered a man standing near the road, looking uncertain. "Excuse me," the man said. "Is this the way to the old guest house?" "Yes," he replied. "If you follow this road, it's the third building on the left." "Thank you," the man said, relief evident in his voice. "It's very quiet here." "It is," he agreed. The man hesitated, then added, "I noticed a light on at night." "Near the edge of town." He nodded. "That's my house." The man smiled. It's reassuring, somehow. He did not know how to respond to that, so he simply inclined his head. That night, as he sat by the window, he thought of the traveler. Of how the light appeared from outside, a small marker in the dark. He imagined someone seeing it from the road and feeling less alone. The thought settled gently. He began to understand that the light was not only for him. It was for the town, too. Not as a signal or a message, but as a quiet constant. Something that said this place is still inhabited. This moment is being witnessed. And so he continued. Each night, the lamp was turned on. Each night, the town slept. Each night, the light remained. Not defiant, not demanding, simply present. And in that presence, the town's unspoken memories seemed to rest a little easier, knowing that someone was awake. Keeping watch without intention, holding the night open until morning arrived again. Chapter 3 Seen from other places. The library was quiet even before it opened. Morning light reached the front steps and lingered there, as if considering whether to enter. Inside, the air remained cool, carrying the faint scent of paper and wood polish. The building seemed to wait, not impatiently, but with the steady patience of something accustomed to being useful without being hurried. Before unlocking the door, the man stood for a moment and looked back toward the town. From this position, he could see the roofs arranged in their familiar pattern, the river tracing its gentle curve, the hills forming a soft boundary at the edge of everything. Somewhere among the houses stood his own, indistinguishable in daylight from any other. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. As the hours passed, the library began to receive its usual visitors. They arrived quietly, each carrying their own sense of time. Some stayed only briefly. Others settled into chairs and remained for most of the morning, as if reluctant to leave the calm once they had entered it. The building absorbed them all without comment. From the perspective of the library, the man was simply part of the arrangement. He moved through the space in predictable patterns, adjusting a lamp, returning a book to its shelf. Sitting at the desk to write small notes that would be read by few, if any. His presence was steady, not central, yet somehow essential, like a supporting beam hidden behind the walls. If the library had been able to observe the town beyond its windows more closely, it might have noticed how often people glanced toward the edge of the residential district at night. Not directly, not deliberately, just a brief turn of the head. A pause. A moment of orientation. From a certain angle, the lit window was visible from the main road. It appeared small, easily overlooked, yet it had become a reference point. Something fixed in the darkness. For the elderly man who read the newspaper each day, the light had become part of his nightly routine. He lived alone in a narrow house closer to the center of town. Before turning off his own lamp, he would stand by the window and look outward. There it is, he would think, without attaching words to the thought. Then he would turn away and sleep more easily. For the woman who ran the bakery, the light marked the moment when she knew she could rest. She woke before dawn each day, her body already attuned to the hours that others slept through. On nights when exhaustion pressed heavily against her, she would glance toward the road as she closed her shop. The light would still be on. Good, she would think, though she did not know why. Even the travelers who passed through the town noticed it, though they rarely spoke of it. From the bus window, or from the quiet road leading out toward the hills, they would see it briefly. A single, steady glow. Not inviting, not warning. Simply present. It suggested that the town was not entirely asleep. That there was awareness here, even in the late hours. Back in his house, the man remained unaware of most of this. His nights followed a gentle pattern. Dinner was prepared and eaten slowly. Dishes washed without sound. The lamp turned on as evening deepened. He read, or sometimes wrote, or sometimes did nothing at all. On some nights, he would sit by the window and listen. The town had many layers of sound, even when it slept. Wind moving through trees, a distant train, far enough away to be felt rather than heard. The occasional bark of a dog, quickly answered by silence. These sounds did not disturb him. They reminded him that the world continued, even in rest. One night, he became aware of movement on the street below. A figure walked slowly, unhurried, as if reluctant to break the quiet. When the person passed beneath the window, the light touched them briefly, revealing the outline of a coat, the tilt of a head. Then they moved on, disappearing into shadow. He wondered where they were going. The thought did not linger. Another night, rain finally arrived. It fell softly, more suggestion than downpour, tapping gently against the window and the roof. The street darkened, reflecting the lamp's glow in faint, broken shapes. The town seemed to draw inward, wrapping itself more tightly in sleep. He remained awake, listening. Rain had a way of smoothing time. Each drop fell independently, yet together they formed a steady presence. He felt his thoughts slow, stretch, then settle. He remembered other nights, long ago, when he had stayed awake in a different place. A city apartment, high above the street. The light there had felt harsher, more exposed. He had kept it on out of necessity, not choice. Here, the light felt different. It did not separate him from the night. It joined him to it. As the rain eased and finally stopped, he noticed something new, the reflection of his window in a neighboring house. Not the light itself, but its echo. A faint suggestion of glow, barely visible. It was enough. The next morning, he found a small note slipped through his door. It was written simply, in careful handwriting. "I walk past your house at night. The light is comforting. Thank you." There was no name. He held the note for a moment, then placed it on the desk near the lamp. It did not make him feel proud, nor did it make him feel responsible. It simply added another layer of understanding. The light had been seen. Not as a signal, not as a message, but as a presence. From the hills above the town, if one were to look down at night, the pattern of lights would appear mostly unchanged. Houses dark. Streets dim. The river is barely visible in line. And there, near the edge, one small window was glowing steadily. The hills would not judge it. The town would not question it. The night would not resist it. It would simply exist, alongside everything else, holding its place. And the man, sitting quietly at his desk, would continue to keep the lamp on, not because it was noticed, but because it felt right to do so. In that way, the light belonged not to him, and not to the town alone, but to the space between waking and sleeping, where time softened, and the world breathed more slowly. Chapter 4: The Night That Nearly Changed. There came a night when the routine hesitated. It did not break. It did not announce itself. It merely slowed, as if time had placed a careful hand on the evening and asked it to wait. The day had been unremarkable. Clouds passed over the town without releasing rain. The library closed at its usual time. The streets emptied gradually, with no sense of urgency. Everything suggested that the night would arrive and unfold as it always had. Yet as dusk settled, the man felt a faint resistance, like a breath held just a little longer than usual. He prepared dinner but ate less than normal. He washed the dishes and left them to dry, noticing how the kitchen light reflected faintly off the sink. When he moved toward the desk, he did not immediately turn on the lamp. The room remained dim. Outside, the town was already preparing for sleep. Lights clicked off behind curtains. Footsteps faded. The familiar sounds softened and blended. He stood by the window, hands resting lightly on the frame. The street below looked the same as always, yet he felt newly aware of the darkness gathering there. Not threatening, not heavy, simply complete. A darkness that did not expect interruption. For the first time since he had returned to the town, he considered not turning on the lamp. The thought arrived quietly, without insistence. It felt neither right nor wrong. Just possible. He wondered what would happen if the window remained dark. Would the town notice? Would anyone feel the absence, or would the night simply absorb it? Smoothing over the difference as it did with so many other small changes? He imagined the elderly man turning away from his window without seeing the glow. The baker is closing her shop and finding only darkness along the road. The traveler passing through without that small point of orientation. The images were not troubling. They were neutral, almost gentle. Perhaps, he thought, the light was not as important as it seemed. He remained still, listening. The house held its breath with him. The room waited. Then, from somewhere deeper inside, a different thought surfaced. The light was not a duty. It was not a promise. It was not something owed. It was a choice. And tonight, that choice mattered not because others might notice, but because he would. He reached for the lamp and turned it on. The glow returned to the room without ceremony. Shadows retreated to their familiar places. The window filled once more with soft, steady light. Nothing dramatic happened. The town did not stir. No sound marked the moment. The night accepted the light as it always had. Yet within the small space of the room, something settled. He sat down and opened a notebook instead of a book. Its pages were mostly blank, save for a few scattered lines written over the years. Thoughts captured without the intention of being read again. He wrote slowly. Not a story. Not a record. Just observations. The town sleeps deeply. The light feels warmer in autumn. Some things exist only by continuing. He paused often, letting silence return between words. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of cooling leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its sound stretched thin by space and time. The night progressed. At some point, he realized he was tired, not the heavy exhaustion of resistance, but the gentle tiredness that comes from being awake long enough to feel complete. He closed the notebook and left it on the desk. Before turning off the lamp, he stood by the window once more. The street was empty. The town was fully asleep now, held together by quiet routines and unspoken trust. The light in his window rested there like a final thought before dreaming. He turned it off. Darkness filled the room, soft and immediate. Yet even as he lay down, he knew the light would return tomorrow night, and the next, and the next. Not because it had to, but because it belonged to the rhythm he had chosen. The night that nearly changed passed without changing anything. And in that passing, the town remained what it was, a place where small consistencies mattered more than grand events. Where a single window could glow or darken without consequence and yet still mean something. Chapter 5: Time moving without direction. The season changed without a clear boundary. There was no single morning when autumn arrived. Instead, the air cooled gradually, as if the town had decided to breathe a little more slowly. Leaves began to gather along the edges of the road, not falling all at once, but appearing little by little, as though they had always been there. The man noticed these changes without naming them. He adjusted his routine in small ways. A slightly heavier jacket in the morning. Hot tea replacing cold water. The window opened less widely at night, and the air was allowed in carefully rather than freely. The light in the window remained. If time had a shape in the town, it would not be a straight line. It would be something closer to a pool of water, deep enough that movement within it was visible only by subtle ripples. Days passed. The library continued to open and close at its modest hours. Books moved in slow cycles from shelf to hand and back again. Some remained untouched, waiting patiently for reasons that might never come. He continued his work there, repairing, organizing, and maintaining. The tasks did not accumulate. Each day arrived mostly empty and left mostly empty, as if the work existed only to fill the present moment. On one afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the high windows at a low angle, he found himself standing still among the shelves. He could not say why he had stopped. The quiet felt thicker than usual, as if the space were listening. He became aware of his own breathing, of the faint sound of fabric shifting as he moved. Even these seemed almost too loud. Time did not move forward. It rested. He remained there until the sensation passed, then returned to the desk and wrote a brief note about a damaged binding. Later that evening, walking home, he noticed that fewer lights were visible in the town. Not because people had left, but because they had begun to close their curtains earlier. The nights arrived sooner now, and people responded by retreating more fully into their homes. The single lit window near the edge of town stood out more clearly. He was aware of it as he approached his house, seeing his own light from a distance. It did not feel like arriving somewhere so much as re-entering a state. Inside, the house was calm. He prepared dinner and ate slowly, letting the warmth spread. When he finished, he did not immediately clean up. He sat at the table and listened to the faint sounds of the town settling. There were fewer footsteps now. The streets had grown quieter earlier in the evening. Even the insects had adjusted their rhythms, their sounds thinning as the air cooled. When he finally turned on the lamp by the window, it felt like continuing a sentence rather than beginning one. He did not read that night. Instead, he sat and watched the shadows shift slightly as cars passed far away, their headlights briefly altering the balance of light and dark in the room. Each change was small, temporary. The window reflected his face faintly. Not clearly enough to study, just enough to confirm that he was there. He thought again of time. Not as something that moved him forward, but as something he inhabited. The past existed here without pressure. The future remained undefined, not because it was uncertain, but because it did not need to be specified yet. The present expanded to fill the space between them. On another night, he fell asleep with the lamp still on. He did not plan to. His eyes simply closed while he sat at the desk, his body recognizing rest before his thoughts did. The light continued to glow, unattended. Outside, the town slept as usual. No one noticed the difference. When he woke later, the room was unchanged. The lamp still cast its soft circle. The window still held the night. He turned off the light and went to bed without reflection. In the morning, the town resumed its quiet routines. The elderly man read his newspaper. The bakery opened before dawn. The river continued its slow movement. No one mentioned the light, or its brief extension into deeper night. Time had absorbed it. As the weeks passed, the hills began to lose their color. Leaves gathered more thickly now, their presence acknowledged by the sound they made underfoot. The air sharpened slightly, encouraging deeper breaths. The man felt no urge to mark these changes. He did not think in terms of seasons so much as textures. Cooler air, shorter light, longer nights. Each adjustment was accepted without resistance. The window continued to glow each evening. It became, in a quiet way, a measure of time, not because it changed, but because everything else did. The town aged gently around it. The nights deepened, the days shortened, and within that slow movement, the light remained steady, offering no direction, no instruction, only continuity. A reminder that time did not need to be pursued. It could simply be lived. Chapter 6, where wakefulness softened. Sleep did not arrive for him all at once. It never had. Instead, it approached gradually, like fog moving in from the river, thinning the edges of thought before touching its center. Some nights, he welcomed it early. Other nights, he remained awake long after his body had grown still, resting in the space between intention and rest. The light by the window accompanied him through all of it. He had begun to notice that his waking hours at night felt different from those of the day. Not clearer, not heavier, just quieter in a way that allowed thoughts to drift without needing to arrive anywhere. On one such night, he sat with his eyes closed, the book unopened before him. He was not asleep. He was not fully awake. The room existed around him in softened outlines. The lamp's glow reached his closed eyelids as a gentle warmth rather than light. Sounds from outside arrived without urgency, slipping past his awareness instead of asking for it. In this state, memories surfaced without sequence. A childhood afternoon spent lying on tatami, listening to cicadas. A train ride taken without a destination, simply to watch landscapes pass. The first night in this house, silence had felt unfamiliar rather than comforting. These memories did not demand interpretation. They appeared, lingered briefly, and then dissolved. He understood, without articulating it, that this was the state the town itself entered each night. Not fully asleep, not fully awake, aware enough to remain itself, resting enough to let go. The light in the window was part of this state. It did not keep the night at bay. It softened the transition, creating a gentle gradient between inside and outside, between consciousness and rest. There were nights when he dreamed while sitting upright. The dreams were not vivid. They lacked narrative and detail. Instead, they felt like impressions, the sense of walking without feet, of standing in a place that was familiar but unnamed. In these dreams, the town appeared not as it was, but as it felt. Houses blended. Streets curved endlessly. The river did not move, yet it was never still. The hills watched without observing. And always, somewhere within the dream, there was light. Not a source. Not a direction. Just light. When he woke from these half-dreams, he felt no disorientation. The room was still there. The lamp still glowed. The night continued, unbroken. Outside, others slept more deeply. Yet even in their sleep, they were not entirely unaware. The baker dreamed of ovens cooling gently rather than burning too hot. The elderly man dreamed of mornings without urgency. The traveler, staying briefly at the guest house, dreamed of roads that led somewhere kind. None of them knew why their dreams felt calmer here. The town itself held them. And the light, small and steady, was part of that holding. One night, the man noticed that he could no longer remember when he had begun leaving the lamp on so consistently. The habit had lost its origin. It existed now without explanation, like the river's curve or the hill's silhouettes. This did not trouble him. Some things, he understood, were not improved by remembering their beginnings. As winter approached, sleep grew heavier across the town. People lingered indoors. Fires were lit. Curtains drawn earlier still. The night expanded, pressing gently against windows. The light remained. He found that on the coldest nights, he slept better with it on. The glow created a sense of continuity, as if the night were being watched over, not guarded, but acknowledged. He began to think of sleep not as an absence, but as a shared state. When he slept, the town slept with him. When he woke briefly, the town shifted slightly, then settled again. There was no hierarchy in this. No responsibility. Only coexistence. On a particularly quiet night, when even the wind had stilled, he whispered a single thought aloud, surprised by the sound of his own voice. "This is enough." The words did not echo. They did not change anything. They simply joined the crowd and disappeared. The lamp continued to glow. Sleep came and went. And the boundary between waking and dreaming grew softer still, until it was no longer something to cross, but something to remain within. Chapter 7 When the night included the light. At some point, the night stopped noticing the light as something separate. It did not happen suddenly. There was no moment of recognition or adjustment. Instead, the light became folded into the night's structure, like a star that had always been there, or a reflection that no longer required a surface. From the street, the window no longer looked like an interruption. It looked like part of the town's breathing. The man sensed this change without naming it. On evenings when he returned home later than usual, he sometimes paused at the edge of the road and looked toward his house. Seeing the light already waiting for him felt neither comforting nor surprising. It felt expected, as if the house itself had turned it on. Inside, the room held the same quiet arrangement each night. The desk by the window. The chair pulled slightly back. The lamp angled just enough to avoid glare on the glass. These details had settled into place through repetition rather than intention. He no longer thought about whether to turn the light on. His hand reached for the switch as naturally as it reached for the door or the kettle. The action carried no weight. And yet, its presence continued to matter. On one night, a power outage moved through the town. It was brief and unremarkable. Somewhere beyond the hills, a line had failed. The lights flickered once, then disappeared. Darkness filled the streets evenly, without discrimination. Inside his house, the lamp went out. The room did not feel empty. It felt complete in a different way. Darkness pressed gently against him, not as an absence, but as a fullness without edges. He sat still, listening. Without the light, the night seemed closer. The sounds of the town reached him more clearly, the wind in the trees, the faint movement of someone shifting in their sleep, the distant call of an owl from the hills. The town remained intact. After a while, the power returned. Lights blinked back on across the valley. The lamp by the window glowed once more, resuming its place without comment. Nothing had been lost. The light, he understood then, was not a requirement. It was an offering. From that night on, he felt even less attached to the act of keeping it on and more connected to the state it created. Whether the window glowed or darkened, the town held its quiet. The light had taught it how. As winter deepened, snow arrived one morning without warning. It fell slowly, each flake distinct, settling into the town's contours without altering them. The river darkened beneath it. The hills softened. That night, the window's glow reflected off the snow, spreading gently across the street. The light looked different now, diffused, multiplied, as if the town itself were glowing faintly in response. From inside, he watched the snow fall, his thoughts unhurried. The town slept beneath the snow. The light rested within it. Time slowed further, almost to stillness. He slept early that night, the lamp still on, dreams drifting in and out without definition. When he woke before dawn, the snow had stopped. The world outside the window looked suspended, untouched. He turned off the lamp and lay still, letting darkness return. Morning would come eventually. It always did. But for now, the town remained held in that space between night and day, between light and dark, where nothing needed to happen. And in that space, the window, whether lit or not, remained part of the sleeping town's quiet understanding. Chapter 8: The Shape of Returning. There was no sense of approaching an ending. If anything, the days felt more complete than before, as though they had finally settled into a form that required no further adjustment. The town moved through its routines with an ease that suggested it had always known how to do this, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to remember. The man noticed that his thoughts had grown quieter. Not fewer, just softer. They arrived without insistence and left without resistance. Even when memories surfaced, they did so gently, as if aware that they did not need to explain themselves. In the mornings, frost sometimes traced thin patterns along the edges of windows. He would pause to observe them, not to admire, but to acknowledge. By midday, they were gone, leaving no trace. This, too, felt right. At the library, the shelves seemed fuller, though no new books had arrived. The space felt inhabited even when empty, as if the quiet itself had learned to remain behind after people left. One afternoon, the student did not come. Another day, the elderly man did not arrive for his newspaper. There was no concern. Absence here did not suggest loss. It suggested rest. The woman from the bakery stopped by briefly one evening, just before closing. "I'll be away for a few days," she said. "I wanted something to read." He helped her choose a book without discussion. When she left, the library returned to its stillness, untroubled by the temporary change. That night, as the town darkened, he turned on the lamp and sat without purpose. The window reflected the interior faintly: the desk, the chair, the quiet arrangement of objects that had found their places over time. Beyond the reflection lay the street, dim and empty, the snow along its edges already beginning to melt. He thought, briefly, of leaving the town again. The thought did not carry longing or dissatisfaction. It appeared as a neutral possibility, like a road one might take or not take. He let it pass. The town did not require permanence. Nor did it demand departure. It existed as it was, and allowed others to do the same. Later, lying in bed, he listened to the house settle around him. Wood contracts slightly in the cold. The faint sound of water in the pipes. These were not signs of decay, but of presence. The house, like the town, was awake in its own way. Dreams came lightly. He dreamed of walking through streets that had no names, where every window glowed softly, not brightly enough to wake anyone, not dimly enough to disappear. The light did not come from lamps or fixtures. It came from the rooms themselves. People slept there, peacefully. He did not see their faces. He did not need to. When he woke, the dream remained with him only as a feeling, a sense of continuity, of gentle repetition without stagnation. The next evening, he noticed that another window down the street remained lit longer than usual. Not all night. Just longer. He did not watch it. He did not assign meaning. He simply noticed and continued. The town did not change because of this. Nor did it need to. One light did not create the night. Many lights did not disrupt it. They existed together, each aware of the other only in passing. As winter began to loosen its hold, the air shifted again. The town breathed differently. Snow gave way to damp earth. The river sounded slightly fuller. The light in the window remained. It was no longer a marker of wakefulness. It was no longer a point of reassurance. It was simply part of the town's texture, like the curve of the road or the way shadows fell at dusk. And in that simplicity, it found its most natural place. The man continued his days. He woke. He worked. He returned home. He turned on the lamp not to keep the night away, but to accompany it. Outside, the town slept not deeply, not lightly, but as itself. And the window, lit or dark, remained exactly where it had always been, holding nothing, offering nothing, needing nothing. Just there. Chapter 9 The Town's Dream. If the town dreamed, it did so without images. There were no scenes or narratives, no remembered faces or future hopes. Instead, its dream was a state of slow, continuous awareness that existed beneath movement and rest alike. At night, this awareness deepened. Houses settled into the ground as if leaning into sleep. Roads softened, their edges less defined. Even the hills seemed to lower themselves slightly, easing the weight they carried through the day. Within this shared rest, the window's light appeared not as a point, but as a tone. A gentle variation in the town's darkness. A subtle warmth woven into the fabric of night. The town did not watch the light. It felt it, just as it felt the river's steady presence, or the way the wind moved differently through narrow streets than through open fields. These sensations did not require attention. They simply existed. Somewhere in the town, a child shifted in sleep and dreamed of floating without effort. Somewhere else, an animal listened briefly to a distant sound, then returned to rest. Somewhere, a clock continued to measure time that no one was counting. The man slept, too. His dreams were thin and quiet, more like thoughts than images. He dreamed of sitting by the window, though he was already there. He dreamed of light that did not come from a source, but from awareness itself. He did not wake to these dreams. They passed through him without leaving marks. The town accepted this, just as it accepted everything else. Morning arrived gently, but even then, the dream did not end completely. It thinned, retreated slightly, but remained beneath the surface of waking life. The bakery opened. The library unlocked its doors. The river continued to move. All of it happened within the town's larger, unbroken rest. On one morning, the elderly man did not come to read his newspaper. Another day passed, and then another. No announcement was made. No sign appeared. His house remained closed, curtains drawn. The town adjusted, not with sorrow, not with urgency. Simply by redistributing its quiet. The bench where he had sat remained empty. The space he had occupied returned to stillness. Memory, here, did not cling. It flowed. The light in the window continued to glow each night. Perhaps it glowed a little longer now. Perhaps that was imagined. The difference did not matter. At dusk, the town shifted into its night rhythm once more. Curtains closed. Lights dimmed. Sounds softened. The window's light joined the darkness, neither resisting nor illuminating it fully. If someone had been passing through, they might have felt the town watching them not with eyes, but with awareness. A sense of being held briefly, then released. The town's dream expanded to include them, then gently let them go. From the hills, the town appeared unchanged. From within, it felt complete. And at the edge of it, the house with the narrow garden rested quietly, the lamp by the window. Continuing its simple work of being on, or not being on, without concern for either state. The town dreamed on. Chapter 10, closing without ending. There was a moment, impossible to locate in time, when the town seemed to exhale. It was not tied to an event. Nothing happened to cause it. No sound marked its arrival. And yet, something loosened. The days began to feel less separate from one another. Morning blended into afternoon without resistance. Evening arrived without the sense of conclusion it once carried. Night unfolded not as an opposite to day, but as a continuation. The man noticed that he no longer measured his evenings. There was no longer a sense of before sleep and after waking. Instead, there was only a gradual shifting of awareness. He might sit by the window and read for a time. Then find himself standing in the kitchen, then lying in bed, with no clear memory of transitions between these states. Time moved, but it did not announce itself. The light in the window continued its quiet presence. Some nights, it remained on until morning. Other nights, it went dark earlier. Sometimes, it flickered briefly, as if acknowledging the night, then rested. None of these variations mattered. The meaning had dissolved into consistency. Outside, the town accepted this without adjustment. The bakery continued to open before dawn. The library continued to open later than most places, as if respecting the town's preference for lingering rest. Books continued to wait. On a morning softened by mist, the man arrived at the library to find the door already unlocked. He paused. This was unusual, but not alarming. Inside, the air was still, unchanged. No one stood at the desk. No footsteps echoed. The door had simply been left open. He stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and began his work as usual. The moment passed without consequence. Later that day, as he returned home, He noticed the river running slightly higher than before. Not dangerously so. Just fuller, carrying more of itself forward. He stood on the bridge and watched. Water flowed without destination. It did not hurry. It did not linger. It moved because that was its nature. That evening, he did not turn on the lamp right away. He sat in the dim room and allowed darkness to gather. The outlines of furniture softened. The window became a reflective surface rather than a frame. When he finally turned the lamp on, the light felt almost unnecessary. Still, it rested there gently. He thought of the town, not as a collection of buildings or streets, but as a state that could be entered. One entered it by slowing, by noticing, by allowing things to remain incomplete. Perhaps, he thought, the town itself had never truly been asleep. It had simply been resting in a way that resembled sleep to those who hurried past. Late that night, he stood by the window and looked out. There were fewer lights now. But there were also more. Some windows glowed faintly. Others remained dark. The pattern shifted constantly, too subtle to track. No single light stood out anymore. The town no longer needed one. This realization did not feel like a loss. It felt like rest. He turned off the lamp and left the room dark. Then, after a while, he turned it on again, not because it was needed, but because the act itself had become a form of listening. The town received this gesture without a response. And that was enough. In the days that followed, nothing changed. Which was to say, everything continued. People arrived. People left. The town adjusted without remark. The library remained open. The river continued to move. The hills watched without watching. At night, sometimes the window glowed. Sometimes it did not. The town did not record these differences. It did not need to. If someone were to pass through the town now, they might not notice anything unusual. They might describe it as quiet, or small, or forgettable. And yet, they might sleep more deeply there. They might breathe a little slower. They might leave with the feeling that something had been held for them, briefly, and then returned. The man continued to live in the house near the edge of town. He woke. He worked. He rested. He kept no record of how long he had been there, or how long he would remain. The window remained where it had always been. Sometimes lit, sometimes dark, always part of the sleeping town. And somewhere between waking and dreaming, between light and night, the town continued, closed enough to rest, open enough to remain. Chapter 11. Enough to sleep. Nothing new arrived. That was the first thing the night offered. No sound announced itself. No thought was asked to be followed. The town did not shift or adjust. It simply remained. The man was already at home when evening settled. He had eaten earlier than usual, or perhaps later time no longer insisted on clarity. The house was dim, the air calm, the familiar arrangement unchanged. The lamp by the window was on. Its light was steady, but even that steadiness felt optional now, like a breath taken without thinking about breathing. The room did not depend on it. The night did not resist it. He sat down, not at the desk, but on the floor, leaning lightly against the wall. The window was open just enough to let the air move. Outside, the town was very still. Not silent still. Silence implies effort. Stillness does not. A distant sound moved through the air, perhaps a train, perhaps only wind shifting its weight. It passed without requiring recognition. Somewhere, water continued to move as it always had. The town was asleep. Not deeply, not lightly, as itself. The man closed his eyes. The light did not disappear. It softened, spreading inward rather than outward, becoming warmth instead of brightness. The boundary of his body loosened slightly, no longer needing to be held in place by attention. Thoughts slowed, not one by one, altogether. They became less like words and more like space. He did not review the day. He did not remember the past. He did not imagine what would come next. There was nothing left to prepare. If the town had been listening, it would not have heard anything unusual. Just one more presence settling into rest, no different from any other. The window remained where it had always been. The light remained, or perhaps did not. The distinction was no longer important. Sleep approached without direction. It did not arrive. It was entered. Like stepping into water that was already warm. The town accepted this without response. And somewhere between the last awareness of light and the first depth of rest, everything found its place, not permanently, not meaningfully, but sufficiently. Enough to sleep.